And welcome to a new episode of PR 360. And I'm your host, Brett Dice. If you could please subscribe to PR 360 on all your favorite podcasting sites. Leave a 5-star review if you like this podcast. If not, let us know how we can do it better for you. But this week, we're going to be talking about B2B marketing. Yes, I think it's a love for a lot of people, but some people it's kind of just put by the wayside, but it's a very important thing because a lot of you are part of the B2B type of marketing. But with me, I have Jason Bradwell with me, and he is a B2B marketing expert, and he doesn't actually think it's boring at all, which is good because this is going to be a very lively conversation about it as well. But he's had a bunch of different experience, including being the host of B2B Better, a podcast about how companies can use marketing to navigate significant moments of change, and writes a weekly newsletter that helps early stage companies build modern day strategies. So welcome to the show, Jason.
Brett, it's a pleasure to be here. You use the word expert. I'll let your audience be the judge of that, but I can definitely try and fill 20 minutes with B2B marketing goodness.
All right. Well, I hope I said it correctly for my audience to be persuaded to think you're an expert, because that's what we're trying to do here. But my first question is always, are you a coffee or tea drinker?
Well, if the accent doesn't give it away, I am British, and I just cannot say no to a good cuppa. I take it pretty strong. They call it a builder's tea where I'm from, so just a dash of milk. Used to take 2 sugars, but I'm getting older now, so I've halved it and just take 1. So yeah, tea all the way.
So you're trying to go to the closer of just tasting the true meaning of tea without any of the extra stuff added, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly right. Yeah. And I got to say, I took great offense at that Ted Lasso bit in the first episode where he comes to the UK and he tries on tea and he compares it to dirty dishwater. I just think he didn't get given the right cup.
It's true, because tea could actually be pretty good, just like coffee. You brew it right and you get the right ingredients, and it's really good for the most part.
That's it.
All right. I gave a brief summary about your expertise, but can you give our listeners a little bit more about your expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a B2B marketer through and through, full-time in-house marketing director at a B2B technology company. And in my spare time, as you mentioned, I run a podcast called B2B Better and write a weekly newsletter called the B2B Bite. Really, my experience in the B2B world is more on the kind of enterprise side of things, high value, low volume sales environments, predominantly with companies that are well established, have been around for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and have been running a very successful sales-led commercial strategy, but are now having to readjust to the realities of how modern day B2B buyers actually buy products, which does lend itself to more marketing dominant strategies, channels, and tactics. So yeah, that's my background.
Gotcha. And then if it has, the transparency culture affected B2B? Has there actually been more about that authenticity, as we've seen in more of the consumer side of marketing and PR?
Yeah, I absolutely believe so. The reality of it is that B2B buyers have more information available to them when it comes to evaluating products and services than they've ever had before in the history of B2B. And the kind of old school playbooks of cold outbound, taking big trade show booths and relying on foot traffic that your sales team can convert into demos and potentially meetings and potentially customers, sending out that odd press release every 6 months and saying, that's marketing done, just no longer work. If a B2B buyer wants to find out about how they can solve a specific problem, they've got plenty of channels they can turn to independently without ever speaking to a vendor. They can join online communities, they can go on social media, they can look at G2 or Capterra. There's plenty of options out there to self-evaluate products and services. So the mindset of B2B organizations needs to and has started to shift away from being just a company that's loud and is trying to talk about how great it is across as many platforms as possible, and really on about delivering value, both in terms of helping customers answer their questions, but also how that brand distinguishes itself from the others in the market.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, with that part of transparency, are we seeing more B2B companies using like social media more? Are they using more press releases more? Are they doing a little bit more PR and marketing than they have before? Is that what I'm hearing from you instead of less? Because it feels like before it was just less. And like you said, we did something. Yay.
Yeah, exactly right. I think there are a lot of B2B organizations out there that are still doing PR, but are thinking more strategically around how PR can actually serve them and in turn serve their customers and deliver that value I was just talking about. But there are still plenty of organizations out there that just look at PR as putting out a press release across the wire and saying jobs are good, which clearly it isn't. And even worse, still thinking that appointing a new sales director or releasing some, niche feature that no one really cares about, it warrants making a big song and dance about in the form of a press release. I think the clever and smart B2B organizations out there that are using PR strategically are thinking about how can we voice our opinion around specific trends that are of importance to our B2B buyers, in a way that delivers value through the media. That's the traditional media. To your point about social, 100%. What I think is currently an undertapped opportunity is how particularly enterprise B2B brands like the ones I've worked with throughout my career that do have sales dominant commercial strategies, how they can equip themselves to leverage the personal social media accounts of their employees and of their salespeople and position those folk as thought leaders in the channels where their buyers are actually spending time. It feels like a natural thing to do in just posting regularly across your brand accounts and your brand channels. But the reality is that people buy from people. And there's plenty of data out there to suggest that the reach and the conversion rates of leveraging employee advocacy and social selling far outstrips the potential success you can achieve just by focusing on your brand accounts.
Gotcha. And then that kind of leads into the next question about, are there any common mistakes that PR pros make when doing P2B? Is it the whole doing PR, but not really actually trying to actually do PR, like do what you just said previously? Is that one of the things, or is it there other things that I don't even know about?
Well, I definitely think there is a systematic problem when it comes to B2B companies thinking, all right, now we need to actually start taking marketing seriously, and better balance the scales between demand creation and demand capture. And they just adopt a kind of scattershot strategy where it's just, we need to get everything out there across all the channels all the time without really digging in and thinking, okay, who are we actually targeting? What does our ISP look like? ICP, I should say, look like? Where are they spending their time? How are they engaging with content? What are the specific questions that they're asking? And working backwards from that. I mean, it's marketing 101, it's communications 101. Do your research. But I think in the excitement of all these new channels now being available to us and being able to be activated at a relatively low cost, you just start spraying stuff everywhere without really thinking, is this delivering value to the customer? So yeah, I'd say that's probably the most common mistake that B2B companies make when it comes to building out a marketing strategy.
Gotcha. So it seems like, I mean, I read a podcasting book about niching your podcast. Is that similar to what, like niching yourself enough where you're successful, but don't scatter shot your marketing strategy or PR strategy, but niche it to where you're being successful and then eventually widen it? Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, there's power in focus. I'll say that. And yeah, I think the kind of weakest piece of positioning you can have is we need to be all things to all people everywhere. But that is typically that is often the attitude that is adopted by leadership teams when they're giving their marketing teams directions on what they want to see. So yeah, absolutely, there's power in niching down. and figuring out what is your unique point of view or unique voice around a particular subject, and hammering that home.
Gotcha. And then how long does it typically take for a testing period of marketing when you're starting it with a new client? Like for the testing period of marketing purposes, how long does it take for that testing period? Maybe it's for your strategy, maybe it's for just figuring out where this company's going. How long does that take?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny time because it's never been easier for B2B brands to run experiments and run tests on the channels where their customers are spending time. But there's seemingly never been less appetite to actually give experiments and tests real time to actually produce results. I think it is a common symptom of over eager B2B companies who are quote unquote discovering marketing for the first time, to throw everything they've got at a particular channel or a gimmick or a piece of hype that they've read about or seen on social media, and give up after a month or 2 months worth of investment, and then revert back to whatever they were doing before, which was producing results but diminishing results over time. I like to break it down into two buckets when it comes to testing. I think you've got your in experimentation, you've got your big ticket experiments, and you've got your milestone experiments. Your big ticket experiments are focused around the big ticket items. Like, we're going to launch a new channel. For example, we have never invested in employee advocacy or social selling. That is a big ticket strategic move. Those kind of programs need anything from kind of 6 to 12 months to really start seeing any results, not just good results, but any kind of results. Within those big ticket experiments, however, I do think it's important that you set clear milestones around what you're looking for to give you some sort of indication that things are moving in the right direction, or give you a sense of where your strategy can evolve and be iterated on as you're actually running through that process. Now, those milestone experiments are never going to, force you to shut down this program before that 6 to 12 month period, but they are going to give you some indication that things are moving in what direction that they're moving in. So kind of contextualizing that in the kind of employee advocacy, social selling piece, a milestone experiment could be something like, we're going to spend 2 weeks just pumping out video content across our employee profiles versus the next 2 weeks where we're just going to focus on written content, and what are the results between those two. So yeah, long story short, milestone experiments, big ticket experiments, they both need their own timescales.
And let's say that someone in the marketing or PR department is in that kind of position where they're trying to convince the leadership of doing what you say. How do they go about convincing that? Because that's half the battle. It's like, look, we still need to stay the course. We have a vision for it. We have our big ticket, we have our small ticket or long-term, short-term goals. How do you go about like convincing the leadership team to stay the course when they are like, 2 months, it's not working. What's happening?
Well, I think it's about making sure that you don't launch any new programs before you've received that commitment at the start, right? And that everyone feels comfortable with investing over the long term, 6 to 12 months or whatever that period looks like. And that whatever we kind of see during that period of time, unless we have a real, tangible, objective reason to change course that makes sense as part of our wider strategy, we are just going to stay the course. I think if you start an experiment, like launch a new program, launch a new channel, and you haven't received that permission from your executive team, from your leadership team to actually see it through, that should be a major red flag for a marketer, because it is much harder to defend a piece of work without having received that prior commitment, and when it's seemingly failing, than it is to just kind of get everyone aligned up front at the beginning of that experiment on what our expectations are going to be.
Got you. And then, do you have any formulas that you like to follow when it comes to marketing? Do you have any formulas for like how to create those big milestone to short term type of things? Like, what is your formulas?
Yeah, I've got a kind of 7-step process that I like to go through when looking at a enterprise B2B organization that has run a predominantly sales-led commercial approach and is now looking to balance the scales better towards marketing tactics, creation of demand, capture of demand. And the first step is just the one I mentioned there. It's a commitment to change. You and your executive team need to draw a line in the sand and say, we're going to change the way that we do things. We're going to change the way we go to market. This is going to require some people who perhaps have a vested interest in the status quo to be uncomfortable, but the success and the financial health of our company depends on it. So that commitment needs to be made upfront, loudly, and publicly. Second step is to audit what you've currently got. So your aim is really just to find out what's working, what's not working, where the gaps are. And this involves customer analysis, it involves messaging analysis, it involves infrastructure analysis, really looking under the hood of your CRM and your website. The third step is defining your objectives and your goals. And this is something, back to your question earlier around like, what do people get wrong? I think shockingly, a shocking number of B2B companies out there who are launching marketing programs don't actually define what they're using to measure the success of those programs early on. So your third step, setting your objectives, is absolutely key. Like, what is the metric or set of metrics that we're looking at that are going to tell us over a period of time that we're moving in the right direction? And they could be marketing qualified leads, it could be website sourced opportunities, it could be pipeline, it could be sales velocity, it could be revenue, but it needs to be quantifiable and it needs to be communicated to everyone involved in this new program. Your fourth step is infrastructure. It's cliche, you wouldn't build a house on shoddy foundations, and that's what you need to look at when you're building out a new B2B marketing strategy. There's a lot that can go into this in regards to kind of processes and tooling and systems and what have you, but for the purposes of today's episode, I just really focus on two parts. One, your website. It doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to be able to make it easy for visitors to contact sales, because people who are visiting your website arguably have a higher intent than someone who's just, following you on social media. They've gone to the effort of learning more about you. They need to, it needs to be easy for them to exchange their details. It needs to be easy for them to share their details in exchange for value. So what I'm talking about there is forms that don't have 20 required fields in order for them to download a piece of gated content. And third, it needs to make it easy for them to self-attribute. So why are they coming onto the site, or where did they first hear about you and your brand? And then the second part of infrastructure is your CRM. I still find it shocking how many B2B companies out there don't actually have a fully functioning CRM between their marketing and sales team. And without it, you're really just kind of flying blind. So that's the infrastructure step. Step 5 is strategize. So developing your unique point of view. What is it that you're saying, and why should people, give a crap about it? And why is it different to the rest of your competitors? Second is deciding what programs you're going to kill. Undoubtedly, when you actually start digging into the data, you'll realize that you're overspending in some channels and tactics that aren't actually delivering results. This often is events in the B2B space, like sponsored events. You're spending 50 to 100,000 pounds or dollars or whatever on a big booth at a trade show that no one's really visiting, and it's not really converting in any commercial opportunities. After you've identified your kill programs, you need to decide the programs that are going to actually deliver value based on your customer research. Is that launching a podcast? Is that social selling? Is that building a community? And kind of, developing what that program's going to look like. And then finally, you need the team. So, who are the people who are actually going to execute on the work? And then I'll just quickly close off with the two final steps. Step 6 is execute. You're only as effective as the operational engine that supports your strategy. So, how are you, under this step, developing new content ideas? How are you producing the content that you've roadmapped? How are you distributing the content that you're developing? And then finally, measure. So, I've worked in a lot of companies where a lot of thought goes into the development and the creation and the production and the distribution of stuff, but there's no kind of follow-up really to understand their resonance. So you need to kind of create an environment that fosters the collection of insights and audience feedback across both marketing and sales that will allow you to analyze and iterate and evolve your strategy as you go on. So that's my 7-step process.
I mean, you talked a little bit about the auditing process. How do you actually be able to conduct a proper audit for a B2B on their marketing side?
Yeah, this is a big question, and it could probably be an episode all in of itself. But I think just kind of generally speaking, when you're conducting an audit of a strategy or a channel, first you need to understand what success actually looks like, because without that, you've got no way to measure the results of your activities. So that's the first step. The second step is looking at any quantitative and qualitative data that you currently have or you are collecting to kind of build a baseline of what's actually happening and, more importantly, what's missing. And depending on what you're trying to achieve with this audit, a good place to start is on your website and your CRM. Third step would be, when you've identified gaps, putting in place, as quickly as possible, the mechanisms to plug those gaps. Is there a point of data that we don't currently have any visibility over that is going to allow us to build a strategy in a educated and cohesive way? And then from there, once you've done those 3 steps, you can begin to kind of develop hypothesis and start running experiments and start rolling out new programs and measure them against this information that you've collected. So it doesn't need to be complicated when it comes to an audit, but just understand your objectives, analyze the data you currently have, plug the gaps in the data that you don't currently have, and then develop your hypothesis and start running experiments and go from there.
Mm-hmm. And then, how has social media affected B2B in the last few years? Has it been more of a positive thing? Has it been kind of neutral? How's it been for the B2B industry?
Oh, it's 100% a positive thing. And I think particularly it's a positive thing for organizations that don't have huge marketing budgets. If you think back 10, 15 years ago, really the only way for you to get in front of your potential clients was to take a booth at a big trade show or have a large sales team who are pounding the phones every single day. And both of those cost a significant amount of money. So it was easy in many industries for a couple of players with big budgets to just dominate, right? Social media has leveled the playing field for everybody. If you have a unique point of view and you are willing to commit to providing long-term, no strings attached value over long periods of time, you can do it like immediately. Like you can start your CEO posting on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can build a podcast. You can start a community, all for relatively low cost in the early days, right? You can run these experiments and you can see what sticks. But has social media been a positive thing? 100% in terms of leveling the playing field for B2B companies to reach their prospective customers without having to invest huge amounts of budget.
Gotcha. And then, even going off of that, has LinkedIn been a little bit more of an important social media, or like you said, has it been Twitter as well? Which ones have been a little bit more important for B2B to get their, I guess, branding and marketing out?
I'm going to use that classic marketer response, which is it really depends. And I know that's frustrating for a lot of people to hear. But, it comes back down to, your ICP and doing your customer research to figure out where they actually spend their time. I think in most cases, LinkedIn is probably going to be it. I mean, it's a B2B social media network, effectively. And I don't think it could necessarily harm most companies from spending more time on LinkedIn. But I am starting to see more B2B companies out there on TikTok, right? And I know it's a bit cliche and it's a bit, to say that B2B companies should go on TikTok. It reminds me of that Steve Buscemi meme, Hello Kids, when he's holding the skateboard and he's got the backwards cap. But if it's done in an authentic way, authentic to the platform, it can be a very engaging and appealing platform. I mean, 51%, I think, is the number of TikTok users are over the age of like 29 or something. I'm making that up, but it's something like that. People in that, it doesn't matter if you're a consumer or you're a B2B buyer, you have downtime, and odds are that you're using that downtime on social media in some part, and why not TikTok? So is LinkedIn the most important social media for B2B? You need to do your research, and you need to talk to your customers, and you need to find out and let them tell you.
Mm-hmm. And even moving on to the content side, is there any content the PR pros and B2B overlook? Is it the video? Is it distinguishing between short form TikTok and long term LinkedIn, because you can do about 15 minutes, or YouTube? Is there any content that PR pros in the B2B sector should not overlook?
I freaking love podcasts. I have one, as do you. I listen to them all the time, and the reason I like them is, one, I think there's a kind of authenticity that comes from someone talking in your ear versus just kind of reading text on a screen. Two, I think the repurposing potential of something like a podcast, particularly if you record it as video, and even better if you do it live, is massive, right? You could take, if you did like a live podcast recording, well, one, it's live, so you can activate your community then and there, actually, as you're producing the thing. You can take the audio, whack it onto a podcast directory. You can take the video, throw it onto YouTube. You can take some of the highlights and write it up as a blog post. You can send it out as a newsletter. You can create it as a LinkedIn post. You can do it as a Twitter thread. There's just a lot of potential that comes from running a podcast. And I think particularly if you're an early stage B2B company, or one that doesn't perhaps have a huge content marketing budget, I would suggest you start with a podcast, because I think it's just a great way of getting a lot of content created quickly at a relatively low lift.
Gotcha. And then how will B2B change in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I ask this question as well at the end of every single one of my podcasts. I always ask my guests. And I think, well, just talking about my guests first, like the thing that keeps coming up is employee advocacy and social selling, and kind of, investing in growing your employees as thought leaders within the space. And there are some companies out there that are doing an amazing job of this. One B2B marketing agency, Refine Labs, they do a great job of this. Sweetfish Media do a great job of this. Profitwell have done a great job of this, just taking it to the SaaS side of things. But for me personally, I do believe that, but I do think that we're going to see a greater shift to rebalance the go-to-market commercial functions of particularly large, mature enterprise B2B organizations in favor of growing out their marketing teams. As I say, in a lot of these organizations who have been around for a long time, they're mature. They have large sales teams who are just out there pounding the phones, doing cold emails, attending trade shows, trying to capture the demand of their products that actually exists today in the market. But research suggests that across most B2B companies, that's only about 5% of their total addressable market. So what's happening with the other 95%? Well, most B2B companies, or many B2B companies, I should say, who do have marketing functions, just target them at that 5% as well. So essentially, you've then got this competition between sales and marketing who are all going after the same 5 people. I think over the next 2 to 5 years, you'll see more B2B organizations cotton on to the fact that we need to be actually catering for that 95%. We need to be creating demand with that 95%. We need to be delivering value to that 95%, so that when they do switch from out of market to in market, we are not reliant on being the company that's picking up the phone at that exact moment. They know where they can turn to at least start getting some answers to their questions, the brand that can help them solve their problem. So I think that rebalancing of creation and capturing of demand is going to be a key thing for the next 5 years.
Gotcha. And then fun question for you. What is one tool you would like created for B2B PR pros?
I did have an answer for this one I was thinking about, but actually, as you said it now, I've thought of something else. I would like some sort of tool, like a chip in my brain that would, at the press of a button, just switch off the marketing part of my mind. Like, I think marketers inherently are creative and curious, and it's hard when you're in this profession, and particularly like you and I, who, you know, are doing this in our downtime as well, to just kind of see opportunity and see inspiration everywhere, and always wanting to kind of, you know, throw it into a swipe file or tweet about it, or just kind of be engaged 24/7, and it can get exhausting. So I think, you know, what's one tool I'd like to create for B2B marketing professionals, the ability just to switch off and have a break, and you know, maybe grab a holiday. That would be awesome.
All right. Any final thoughts for listeners?
I've just really enjoyed chatting to you today, Brett. And for anyone who's interested in learning, you know, more about me, I'm very active on Twitter at Jason R. Bradwell. And the link to my podcast, B2B Better, and newsletter, B2B Byte, you can find on my Twitter profile, on LinkedIn, or on my website, www.jasonrbradwell.com.
All right. Thank you, Jason, for joining PR360 and sharing your knowledge on the B2B industry.
Thanks.
And thank you for listening to PR360. As always, please subscribe to PR360 on your favorite podcasting hosting sites. Leave a 5-star review if you like this podcast. If not, let us know how we can do better for you. But join us next week as we talk to another great thought leader in the PR industry. All right, guys, stay safe. Get to understanding your needs for your B2B company. And see you next week. Later.